Good morning. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to Dublin and then share a few housekeeping instructions. Number one, if you do not wish to be included in the recording or in social media, please take the back seats. Number two, back on this side. But I think they've been taken, but you can trade places if you want to go back. Also, we have interpretation available. The headsets are outside. Channel 1 is for English and channel 2 is for French. And now that I'm done with the housekeeping instructions, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for today. Louise Jarvis is a conference and consultant interpreter based in London, UK. And since joining AIC in 2010, she has served as a member of the UK and Ireland Regional Bureau, as the region's Vega representative, and as a member of the Rethink Project. She's also a trainer of conference interpreters at the University of Bath. She's the president of Calliope Interpreters, and we all think she's the best moderator ever. Louise, please.
Thank you, Livia. That was a very kind introduction. It's absolutely fantastic to see you all here this morning, to renew acquaintances and to make some new ones. I'd like to start by thanking the PRIMS Standing Committee for organising today's panel and for putting together such a fantastic group of speakers. I think we're in for a real treat this morning. Now, the background to today's debate is the fact that the mice industry is becoming increasingly determined to ensure that events are sustainable. And this is a concern that we share in AIC as partners of the mice industry. So the purpose of today's roundtable is to learn more about the characteristics of sustainable events and, crucially, to understand what we can do in AIC as consultant interpreters and as interpreters to contribute to making events sustainable. To set the scene, we're going to first hear from Professor Luba Zarski. So she's a professor at Middlebury Institute of International Studies, which is obviously a familiar institution to all of us. Professor Zarski coordinates the Business Development and Sustainability track in the International Environmental Policy Programme at MIIS, and her research focuses on how business practice and economic policy can promote sustainable economic development. She has a particular interest in the global mining industry. Professor Zarski's unable to be with us today, but I caught up with her a couple of weeks ago on Zoom. And the interview we recorded gives an academic's perspective on the issue of business sustainability. And it provides at least part of an answer to some of the questions that we're going to be addressing this morning. So Luba, first question, as an academic, can you help us to define sustainability in the context of events and conferences? For you, what is a sustainable event?
Well, let me start by talking about what do we mean by sustainability in general? A sustainable city, a sustainable business, a sustainable home. And I think it's really important to understand sustainability as a verb and not a noun. It's a movement, it's a process, it's an orientation, it's an attempt to chart a way of living, and that means economically and socially and culturally, that is not based on extraction, that is not an extractive economy, which means we take, we use, we throw away, we throw it somewhere, it's not away, and we're in doing this, we're depleting our whole planetary system is what we're doing. We're depleting our Earth. We're depleting the climate. So we start to say that the most important aspect of sustainability is an understanding that it entails embedding environmental and social concerns in the very DNA of anything we're doing.
Mm.
It's not a bolt-on process. We just keep doing what we're doing, but we pick up our trash and put it in a garbage can. I mean, I'd rather not have the trash on the beach, but that's not really sustainability. That's just cleanup after our dirty extractive ways. So once we begin to think about that and we look at an event, or actually anything we would look at, we would first say, well, what's our footprint here? What is it that we do here that impacts, that has the biggest impacts? Let's do an assessment of what is the impact of this event. And most events, if they're big in-person events or even small ones, an event, if it entails bringing people together, the first thing you have to say was, well, geez, how did people get here? And for many in the world of events planning, this issue of gathering, 500, 1,000, 10,000, hundreds of thousands of people in one place, if you imagine all of the energy, just the energy that it takes to get there, the burning of fuels, let alone all the energy that it took to build the trains and the buses and the planes and it's a huge footprint. And that particular one, the transport issues, is often um, the last one on the list because it's so difficult.
Yeah.
So, of course, the other big events, the other big footprints, aspects of events are often the waste that they generate,
Hmm.
all those people who have to be fed, and the papers that are just a huge amount of waste involved, water, the energy used at the event itself. And then finally, I think it's very important to understand that sustainability does not mean only the environmental, but also the social impacts.
Hmm.
And of course, this came up in such a huge relief in Qatar at the World Cup. Who are the people who built this thing, and what were the conditions under which they were working? And so, sustainability is sometimes talked about in terms of ESG, these frameworks: environment, social, and governance. And I think for people really wanting to commit to a direction of sustainability in events planning, the environmental and the social need to be front and center.
Hmm. Thank you very much. It's very interesting that you've given it a broad definition: environmental, social, and governance. That's important for us to bear in mind. Um, you mentioned that there are huge challenges in making an event sustainable. In fact, it seemed overwhelming when you were talking about, for example, the challenge of transporting hundreds of thousands of people in some cases to a particular event. But it seems that there is a desire to make events more sustainable. And I wonder whether that's something that you've been able to observe, for example, in trends to make events more sustainable over, say, the last 10 years.
Yes. Well, and I think if we take that one big issue, I mean, the other really big one, of course, is energy, the energy use in a big conference center or stadium, or whatever the event might be. But if we take transport, um, that the issue has to be has to be put in the design of the event itself. And one of my favorite examples was in New York at Yankee Stadium. You bring all these people together to watch a baseball game, and oh God, I might have it wrong. Is it Shea Stadium or Yankee Stadium? Sorry, there's two stadiums in New York. But the idea was they partnered with the city of New York around the rail system, around the Muni, the subway system, to maximize the use of the public transport system in bringing people to the event. And
Mm-hmm.
they also really limited the amount of parking. These are the design issues, but they made it possible. The city put on extra cars. They had, if I recall, there were incentives. Didn't cost a lot. So the whole idea was, come watch our game, come by train. And that was built into the design of the event itself.
Mm-hmm.
So That's what I mean about embedded versus bolt on. The other thing that I've seen happen is some airlines more than others, and you'll see this across the board in industry. There's always leaders and laggards. So some companies are much more committed and farther along on their sustainability journey than others. And
Mhm.
that includes airlines. Now, some airlines have put money into research around more sustainable aviation fuels, for example. They still have problems, but they're much better. So, one thing events planners can do is to search out those companies that have commitments to sustainability and provide a partnership so to get participants there by using these better companies that are moving along. It's that kind of thinking. It just needs to embed every decision. But it's not that you land somewhere and say, okay, we're now sustainable. It's always trying to do better,
Mhm.
trying to release the footprint.
And that brings me nicely to my next question, which is whether there are any emerging trends that you've identified in this quest to always do better.
Well, a huge issue for everyone, of course, is plastics.
Uh-huh.
And the amount of plastic waste that's generated, even times, and I've seen it myself, where people are trying, but they just feel like they can't. We just have to have those plastic bottles. That's just glass is dangerous. Someone will, yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
whatever. So I think the push to reduce plastics is key and important for both the events industry and especially the wider tourism and travel industry as well. So
Mhm.
so that trying to find the alternatives there. And again, I think a lot of the sustainability journey, people often think of it's kind of like we're reducing pleasure. Things are going to be harder. But in fact, it's a space for great innovation. So if one says, geez, what can we use besides plastic bottles? What other bottles are available? But if you create, for example, fresh water, filtered water tanks
Yeah.
that people, it's just you have to think differently. You have to think differently when you
Mhm.
when you try to integrate sustainability.
Exactly. And it's part of the design of the event. Mm.
Design of the event and that attention to detail.
Exactly. Is this a phenomenon, this drive for increasing sustainability? Is it a phenomenon that you're seeing across all sectors? Is there a particular sector that is being more effective in its drive to improve the sustainability of its operations or events?
Sustainability is um, everywhere and all companies. And so it's a good time. You'll find many partners and
Mm.
many companies, car companies. I mean, everybody is at least trying to look good.
Right. Well,
And
yes.
some do more than others. But, we are on the cusp now, and Europe is already there. But here in the United States, we're going to be requiring companies to report on climate risk, for example, through the Securities and Exchange Commission. That'll be mandated. So companies there's just a tremendous amount of assessment, disclosure, data, and many companies looking for ways to um, we call it the low hanging fruit for some, to reduce their own impact. So any companies that you might be partnering with in the events organizing space, I think you'll have plenty of partners. But especially, the climate, reducing carbon emissions, being more energy efficient, switching to electric vehicles. This is really mainstream.
Yes, exactly.
Really mainstream. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that everyone's trying to look good. And you mentioned that reporting and adhering to standards is a way of proving that events are sustainable and that companies really are good. How big a problem is greenwashing, and um, how can we guard against untrue claims made by companies? or events?
Greenwashing is a really big problem right now. I mean, I've been in this field for some years, and in the beginning, we were all just so happy that any company would come forward and say, we want to be responsible, and we'd applaud that and just try to move it along. And now everybody wants to say that.
Yeah.
They want to say that, but it's a problem in two ways. There's also the problem of too much cynicism, right? So to me, when I'm teaching students, I try to teach them to be discerning.
Hmm.
Examine, and how can you tell if this company is in some sense for real, if these initiatives for real? And to me, the really important thing is to look at the strategy, of the company, not just adhering to standards, although that's part of it, but is, if a company says we have a commitment to be net zero by 2050, you say, yay. And then you say, so what's the plan?
Hmm.
And you can look at the plan. And, net zero by 2050 for almost anybody is a tough lift.
Mm.
So, if you
Absolutely.
see these kind of easy, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, you think, right. So, what you
So it's
want
got
to
to be
see,
plausible as well.
plausible, realistic,
Mm.
you see real money.
Hmm.
You see companies are investing in real R&D. They have targets. They've got people involved. They're assessing, they're measuring, they're monitoring. Then you think, okay, so like I said, I'm I'm pretty wary of rushes to be labeled sustainable. And I might
Hmm.
caution you all as you move in this direction, getting that stamp of approval. You'll be known when you have good partners, really good, credible partners. When if you go down this route, when you have real data, when you have a strategy, and you don't shy away. It's important to identify the easier things to do because
Mm.
they're low cost and they get you going. But it's also important to see where some of the harder things are and begin to move in that direction. I was
Mm.
talking with someone who's works on sustainability at Microsoft recently, big company. Microsoft has 2,000 people in their company with the word sustainability in their job title.
Right.
Okay, so they have these big targets, and I asked him candidly, can they make these targets? And he said, I don't think so, but we're trying. We're trying, and we have
Mm.
their strategies, and it's not some big pie in the sky thing. They're very, this big
Methodical.
transition.
Mm.
Yeah, so I would say that. I would say, the important thing right now is implementation,
Hmm.
implementation, implementation. And, the role of government, of course, can be so helpful here by setting some standards for disclosure. But, there is a lot of hot air in this
Mm.
space, but there's also some very good, serious, real effort going on.
Mm.
So as I
That's
said,
good to hear.
greenwashing can help you be blind to on both sides.
That's good to hear. And perhaps I could follow up what you've just said. You've already given us part of an answer, I think, to the question of what sustainable interpreting services could look like. For example, you've mentioned that it's important to have a strategy and it's important to work in partnership with other operators, with other providers, for example, perhaps airlines, which you mentioned earlier. Any other thoughts about what a sustainable interpreting service could look like?
Well, and I just find I'm intrigued by the whole idea. I think it's wonderful to even ask the question, and some real thought going into what is the footprint of interpreting. Identifying where you can make the most difference. What are the real impacts in this space? I mean, again, early on when this thing hit, I remember hearing someone from IBM saying they were committed to sustainability, and what they were going to do was to not have styrofoam cups in their cafeterias. And I was like, whoa, this is the world's biggest paper company. That's what you came up with, right? So, but that was a first step. So
Mm.
that's important, is to
Mm.
identify what kind of impacts are there, and therefore what could you do. And
Mm.
one of the things we mentioned before was this issue of flying people around. And
Mm.
I think we're at very early days, honestly, of understanding how best to use virtual technology, how, you know, is it really going for, I think everyone is asking ourselves, when do we really need to be in person?
Yeah.
And is the only alternative to be online? What other designs can we come up with that might entail, do we have to get 10,000 people together globally? Could we imagine 6 simultaneous meetings of 300 people, and they connect somehow, and their travel therefore is just much more,
More
I
local,
mean,
more regional, yes.
more regional, and yet they can connect with others. And so I think being taking some time to be broad thinking. There's a sort of a small and the large, the micro stuff. How much are we flying today? What kind of plastic? Can we reduce plastics and all that? And then this broader thinking of how could we redesign the whole thing to be just much more, to have a really desirable outcome for people that has to be there. But we don't have to do it that way. That just came up when airfares were cheap and we didn't think about carbon emissions. How else can we do this? And I think some scenario work might be interesting, and as you're going forward and begin to think about other ways of achieving the same outcomes.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. One final question, and perhaps a lighter question. What's the most sustainable event that you have ever been to?
Well, I haven't had an event meter, sustainability meter at events, but perhaps at our school, at our university, we have Friday open, what are they called, happy hour events in the garden.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things, we always have an all vegan menu. We really didn't talk about food and the role of the extraordinarily large environmental and social footprint of food, and thinking about the suppliers and where that comes from. It's a kind of a small and local event, so most people ride their bikes or walk. On the other hand, I live about 2.5 hours away from where I teach, so I drive. So it's, that's why it's a verb. I would take a train in a flash if there was one.
If there was one, exactly. Yes.
So, we do our best. Attention to, and everyone brings their own plate, and, but this is a small scale event. I think the bigger, and that's fine, and I love it, but the really big challenge is going to scale. And maintaining some of the wonderful benefits of large international events that can give us that cultural, and yet figure out how that can be sustainable.
Exactly. Yes, change the world, but do it sustainably. Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed, Luba, for your time. And yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and best of luck for a really successful conference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much to Luba, and Prim's Standing Committee. Please do convey that gratitude to Professor Zarsky, because she was very generous with her time and insights. Now, to help us to engage with some of the questions that were raised in that interview, and to learn more about what makes an event sustainable, to learn about how we can contribute, I'm delighted to welcome a panel of distinguished speakers. We have Martin Fullard, please come forward, Anna Plater, who you'll know, Alexandra Hambling, who you'll know, one of us, and joining us on Zoom, we should have Raisa McNabb. Good morning, Raisa.
Morning.
Perhaps I could start by just asking you to introduce yourselves, starting with Martin.
Certainly, thank you. My name is Martin Fullard. I'm Associate Director of News and Content at Davies Tanner, which is a brand communications agency where I front up something called the Business of Events, which is, in essence, a government policy think tank, which is trying to put together a policy of event industry agenda points ahead of the next general election in 2024. And before that, I was an events industry journalist. I was editorial director of Conference News magazine and Exhibition News, Conference and Meetings World, Exhibition World and Access All Areas, so that was pretty busy when it came to deadlines. So I'm pretty well plugged into the events industry, predominantly in the UK, but largely around the world as well.
Thanks, Martin. Let's go to Racer next, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me there virtually. My name is Raisa McNabb. I'm CEO at the UK's Association of Translation Companies, the ATC. Translator originally by training. I've been involved in ISO standards development, which is my angle on the panel today, for many years, both in terms of developing new standards for the translation and interpreting sector, but also in setting up and overseeing an ISO certification body, ATC certification, which aims to meet the needs of the translation and interpreting industry for an industry expert ISO certification body.
Thank you very much. Alexandra?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra Hambling. I'm a NAIC conference interpreter. I have been an interpreter for 25 years and a consultant interpreter for nearly 20 years now. I'm based here in Dublin, Ireland. I'm also a member of Calliope Interpreters, the international network of consultant interpreters. And finally, I'm the chief interpreter of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, recruiting all their teams of interpreters.
Thank you. Anna?
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Pleite. I think most of you know me by now. I'm a NAIC member. I'm a Spanish booth based in Singapore. I'm a member of the standing committee of PRIMS, and I think that's as fancy as it gets for me.
That's quite fancy enough. Well done. Thank you all. To give you an idea of the plan for this morning, we're going to start by defining what we mean by a sustainable event. Martin's going to be very helpful there. And look at trends in sustainable events. That'll take us more or less to the coffee break, after which we'll engage with the ideas to do with how consultant interpreters and interpreters can contribute to event sustainability, and in a second phase, how we can demonstrate that we're doing that. So thinking back to Luba and what she said in her interview, she said that sustainability means embedding social and environmental concerns in the DNA of everything we do. She said it's not a bolt-on process. She also defined sustainability very broadly, referring to social, environmental, and governance standards. So Martin, what did you think to what Luba said? How would you define sustainable events?
I think she pretty much did my job for me there. She was quite comprehensive. I'm not sure if we're able to put the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals on the screen, but it would be interesting if we were able to do that, because I think that to be sustainable, you have to embed it into every stage of what you do, from the planning all the way through to the execution. Now, I'd be interested in a show of hands. Has anyone not seen this before? Is this new to people? That's very comforting, so you all know more or less. If you're running an event, essentially you want to have in your mind, what are you working towards? An event doesn't just happen for the sake of it. It has to have an objective, it has to have a purpose. But of course, we're talking about every single sector in the world running events. If you're running a healthcare conference or something like that, perhaps you could look at one of these goals or two of them and decide which of them you are going to be working towards. It's a guideline, a framework. It's just something to sort of put in the front of your mind to decide whether or not your event is going in the right direction. In essence, when an organizer is running an event, it needs to leave a legacy behind, in whichever way that is. And that might be big, it might be small. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. A sustainable event is about minimizing its consumption impact and maximizing the value creation of that event. And again, that's something I think I'd like to elaborate on a little bit later.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Would either of you two like to add anything on sustainable events? I know that, Anna, you could maybe tell us about this event. We're all at an event today, and I know that the PRIM Standing Committee has made every effort to make it as sustainable as possible.
Yes, so I'm in on this panel in my personal capacity, but just for this brief comment, I'll speak on behalf of the Standing Committee. We're very proud. When we started preparing for this meeting, you, the members, chose sustainability as the topic for today, for this event, and we wanted to preach with the example. So we made every possible effort to make this event as sustainable as possible. And we're very proud because we think we managed to organize the most sustainable AIC event, in-person AIC event so far. So how we've done that, we've looked at the 3 areas of sustainability, starting from the social perspective. We've tried to include as many interactions with the local communities as possible. We also tried to source from local initiatives. Also the fact that we have interpretation today. Some people were asking, why do we have interpreters? Everybody speaks English. Well, interpretation is a tool for integration, and integration makes events more sustainable. So we're all a tool for sustainability here. The fact that the event is going to be in a hybrid format tomorrow is also a tool for sustainability, that's making our event more sustainable. Moving on to the environmental pillar is something that I think this is where we've made the most effort because it was groundbreaking. As far as we know, never in the history of AIC events, we had taken this factor into account. So we've started with the gadgets that you've received. You probably noticed that your badge looks funky. It's because you can plant it. So it's not only reusable, it actually creates life. And the seeds are not invasive. So you can even take it back to Australia. I think it should be okay. Same thing with the pen. The pen is also plantable. So there'll be no waste on the gadgets. But also, more importantly, something that we've done is that because we wanted, as I said, to preach with the example, instead of buying some fancy gifts that will end up in some drawer, instead of buying yet another bottle of water, how many bottles of water can you have before it becomes not sustainable anymore? We decided to use part of the budget that we had for gifts to actually offset the carbon emissions of the whole event. That includes your trips coming here. We've calculated the amount of carbon emissions of all your flights coming to Dublin, the stay in the hotel, all the 4 nights per participant. We've included the heating of the rooms. We've included food waste, and we've come up with a number. There are many calculators, you can find that. And we've offset, so that's what Professor Lula was saying, we're actually cleaning up the mess that we made with this event. We've offset the carbon footprint of this event, so it should be carbon neutral. If anyone wants more details on this, you can ask any of us afterwards, which brings me to the third pillar, which is governance. We're committed to be as transparent as possible with our budget, with the organization, and with any proceedings of the meeting. So if anyone is interested, we'll be happy to share that with you.
Thank you, Anna. That's all really encouraging. I think the most encouraging thing you said was that as interpreters, we're all tools for sustainability. So we can all feel very happy about that. We promote greater inclusion in events, don't we, by enabling people to communicate in a multilingual setting. And there are some sign language interpreters here today as well. I can see, yes, Karen at the front there. So that's another way in which interpretation promotes inclusion. As an English booth, I'm very keen on people speaking their mother tongue, of course. And we enable people to speak their mother tongue. That increases the quality of the debate. It means that people know they get more out of the debate, the quality is higher, they can then disseminate the results, and more value is created, to come back to the term used by Martin. Let me just turn to Raisa on the screen there. Would you like to add anything about what a sustainable event is, Raisa?
Yes, thank you, Louise. I, of course, also arrange meetings, events every year. And when I do, my main concern is to think about this idea of how do we take the social and environmental concerns we have into account in everything that we do, while still keeping the event itself as relevant and attractive and of a high quality as possible, but also accessible. And of course, there are some easier wins, like we've already talked about today, in, for example, not having conference bags anymore or carbon offsetting our emissions. But as an event organizer, one of the fundamental questions that I ask myself and my team is that whether the event should, for example, always be hybrid, always be in person or remote. And if not, how can we justify, how do we justify in person only or remote only experiences and events? So in my mind, the experience of the event attendees comes first and foremost, and everything else flows from that. So sustainability without compromising quality of the events and the discussions in it. And I think interpreting solutions and services play a hugely important role in that. So if we think about the UN's sustainability development goals that we just saw, the critical value, of course, that interpreters and interpreting service providers can bring to the table in this conversation with their clients, with event organizers, I think is in advising and consulting the client on the feasibility and the implementation and the impact of the solutions and services that are available to them, and then how these different solutions can influence the sustainability of the event.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Raisa. So you went back to a point raised by Luba about event design. And I also liked what you said about not compromising quality. So being sustainable, but not compromising the quality of the event. And that could bring us nicely back to your point, Martin, about the legacy of events. So when an event is designed, it's designed to create value and to leave a legacy. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's fundamentally important, particularly with some of the big science and medicine associations and their congresses. A fantastic example of an event leaving behind a very positive legacy was in Glasgow a few years ago. There was a huge diabetes congress which came to the city, and it lasted over 3 to 4 days, as these things do. And while that was a hub for diabetes doctors and scientists and the whole rest of it from around the world to gather, to share knowledge, to advance the cause and to advance medical practices, Glasgow found itself able to set up testing stations all around the city, and they had doctors and scientists out there on the streets literally stopping people and doing a quick by the side of the street test, checking people. And I believe, if memory serves, they found 12 people who were demonstrating early onset of diabetes, 2 of which were quite seriously advanced, and these people had no idea. So in that microcosm example, that was a direct benefit of that event being there, had saved in essentially 2 lives and changed 2 people's lives. And there's multiple other examples around that around the world. It's really important that that legacy is fundamentally leaving the destination or the host city in a better place than when they found it.
I love that example. Thank you very much, Martin. Well, I think we're moving to the end of this first section then on what is a sustainable event. And we could maybe conclude by saying that it's something that tries to minimize value consumption, maximize value creation, including legacy. And the SDGs are a useful reference, aren't they? Because they encompass all kinds of sustainability and encourage us to think very broadly about what a sustainable event is. So those SDGs are relating to health and well-being, responsible consumption, reducing inequalities, education, providing decent work. So we're thinking in this panel very much about sustainability in the very broadest sense. Let's move on then to trends in sustainable events. Martin, again, back to you. You go to many, many events throughout the year. Could you tell us what main sustainability trends you're seeing at the moment or have been seeing over the last few years?
Well, as I did some homework ahead of this event, I had some informal conversations with some agents in France, Germany, and the US, just to understand a little bit more about what their clients are looking for and putting in their RFP, so the request for proposal that an agency would put out. They're fundamentally changing now. They look very different to what they did before the pandemic, so I scribbled down some notes in not particularly any necessary order. Accessibility is absolutely top of the list for lots of event planners when they decide upon a destination of where to host their event. And by that, I'm talking about the infrastructure and the transport. You don't necessarily want people to be able to, you don't want them to struggle to get there. We're not saying don't travel by air, of course not. I mean, if here we are on the island of Ireland, largely, you have to fly to get here. But if you look at somewhere like continental Europe, can you encourage people to travel by train? Yes, of course you can. That's an incredibly valuable asset. Not everyone will do that, but whoever can should be encouraged to do so. Of course, carbon offsetting is another very important trend that we're seeing as well. And I know that in some circles that is considered perhaps not always good enough, but it's certainly something better. It's better than nothing. You know, for every impact that we leave, if we can plant a tree or we can offset in some way, then we should absolutely be doing that. Of course, we then need to understand how our partners and our infrastructure partners are working. So let's look at venues. That's obviously an easy one to maybe home in on. There's a venue in the UK, up in Yorkshire, and it has written in their policy that every single supplier that they use is within a 10-mile radius of their venue. It's a major venue. I won't name them in case I don't have all the facts right. But they will not use a food supplier from beyond the 10-mile radius. They won't use an AV and production supplier from beyond that radius too, nor will they use any other sort of apparatus or anything like that. So instantly, what that one venue has done has cut out hundreds, if not thousands, of road traffic miles. There is examples of poor practice, and perhaps this isn't so relevant to this audience, but there's a football stadium, I know, in London, which hosts events, and their catering partner is up in the northwest of the country. That's 250 miles away. So all the food has to be driven 250 miles down, and the lorries have to go 250 miles back. Now, most of us wouldn't have even thought about that before the pandemic, but now event planners are looking to that granular level of detail. That is the impact, the invisible impact, but it's an important one nonetheless. There's another change in strategy, and I think Luba may have touched on it as well, is that certainly if you're a larger organizer, people are looking more around regional events as well. So rather than having the one big, huge 4-day jamboree down at a major venue in a major capital city, that actually the organizer will move around the country. Now, that's probably more relevant in bigger territories like North America, perhaps. But if you can move fewer people around to your pockets of communities, then again, we're saving on the travel miles. It could be cheaper in the long run as well. So that's another trend that we're seeing emerge. So much so with bigger organizations who can afford that. We're not saying that that's the case with everybody. But there's another sort of interesting example as well about trends, and I just wanted to drop it in there. And this is something Scotland does quite well. Visit Scotland specifically. They have something what they call the policy-driven model, which they go out there courting event business from around the world, which are aligned with the policy objectives of the Scottish government. And I thought that was quite interesting. So that is directly going out to find events that will improve society. And while I know that's not necessarily a trend among event planners, it certainly does actually harness the very best of what those trends represent. So I think that's a really interesting example in Scotland, that whatever they're setting out to do in government, they're going out there to actively court events to substantiate that and back that up.
That was fascinating, especially the last example, although the one that really gladdened my heart was the story about the company in Yorkshire, obviously. Turning to a different region of the world, though, Anna, you're based in Singapore. Are you seeing similar sustainability trends in Singapore or in Asia in general? I imagine the pictures looks a little different there.
Well, I don't think I'm in a position to comment on the big trends in the organizing in the MICE industry, because it's not my industry. But we do see that the general awareness around sustainability in Asia Pacific, at least from my perspective, is not as developed as it is in Europe and in the Western world. We do see, however, that some countries or some specific regions within the continent have more specific concerns. I'm thinking of Bali, where plastic is forbidden. When you arrive in Bali, they'll ask you if you're carrying any plastic bags, for instance, and you're encouraged to leave them at the border. Or things like in Japan, they're particularly concerned about food waste. But then at the same time, for instance, in Japan, for any European going to Japan, the amount of plastic that they use per day is just mind-blowing. So I think, and this might just be my impression, again, I'm not probably the most qualified person to answer that question, but I think that there's still a lot of margin for improvement in the region.
Thank you. Yeah, the picture looks different in different places, doesn't it? Different priorities and so on. Coming to a subject that's very close to all our hearts, Martin, since the pandemic, I imagine that the MICE industry is organising more virtual, more remote events. Raisa also touched on this in her first intervention. What is the trend there, and how does that sit with the sustainability debate?
That's it's a you'd think that would be reasonably easy to answer. Unfortunately, it isn't. It's not a binary decision. Whether someone elects to run an in-person event or they decide to go fully virtual or they have some sort of hybrid mix, it's very much has to be aligned to your objectives and what you can realistically provide. I think during the pandemic, we had no choice but to get familiar with virtual events. And I think one of the main criticisms of them was that they were very two-dimensional. We live and breathe our experiences, and I'm sure everyone in this room has been to multiple AIIC conferences and events over the years, and I'd wager that most of you can probably remember all of them because you were there. You were living them, breathing them, smelling them, the senses. That's what we do. Now, during the pandemic, I hosted or was involved in somewhere, and not that I was counting, about 250 odd events in 2020 alone online, of all different shapes and sizes and subjects, and I cannot remember one of them because the experience was me in my same office chair looking into my same screen. The environment was identical, me and the webcam, that was it. And that not necessarily is a bad thing if we're doing them now and again, but we remember our knowledge. What's the point of being here today if you're not going to learn something new or evolve your opinion that next stage further? You have to live in that moment, and that's where the in-person always trumps the virtual. Now, because of those sort of two extremes, we land somewhere in the middle, which is this hybrid concept. And unfortunately, this is where things get quite complicated because there's no definition of what a hybrid event is. A hybrid event might be live streaming right now with an online audience wanting to ask questions and get involved, much like a TV show. Or it might just be sending out the video afterwards. That's technically a hybrid event too, because you're engaging a wider audience. One thing is sure, though, when you're looking at that big top-end corporate level and perhaps some of the big association congresses, a hybrid event to put on is incredibly expensive. I mean, sometimes even more than the hire of the venue. I mean, you're talking $20,000-$30,000. It's huge money. How deep do you want to go? So you have to look, well, what's my return on investment? An event organizer will be a business somewhere along the line. And in an age where marketing budgets are being increasingly stretched, and that's where events come from, they come from marketing budgets, how are you going to justify effectively doing two events at the same time? So at the moment, anecdotally, we are actually seeing a strong return to in-person. Virtual has a place. That's being used for more smaller satellite events, roundtables, group meetups, think tank discussions, and so on, and that all feeds into a larger narrative, which is good if you can use that content to shape your big blue-ribboned in-person event. You don't want to get that blue-ribboned event wrong. The in-person one has to have the right content. So use virtual events to effectively do your market research, to understand the agenda, to set the topics, and your in-person event will work. If you haven't thought about what your delegates want at the in-person event, then the event will not be a success. So that's how we have to look at it, I think. And I think that there's the other, this is something that not many of the people think about. There's the sustainability concept when it comes to virtual events is we're all here in this room, one room being air conditioned or heated. We're all here and it's one space. If, how many people are here? 100 or so. If 100 of us were all in our respective homes, that's 100 rooms or 100 buildings being heated or air conditioned, 100 more, 100 energy usage episodes rather than the one here. As an organizer, and I know we're going to talk about tools and how we measure things, there's no way you can control that as an organizer. You don't know what the sustainable or the energy impact will be with all those people sitting at home. Whereas here, you can more or less, it sounds maybe Orwellian, but control sort of what people do to a degree, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And you touched a few nerves there. I think I saw representatives of the consultant interpreters group were yesterday meeting precisely to try and decide what a hybrid event is. So yes, saw a few smiles there. But thank you, yeah, really interesting. And it is very difficult, therefore, to measure the impact, the environmental impact then of a virtual meeting, because there are so many unknowns. That's right, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think, we want to talk about tools. I didn't mention this in the trends piece because I thought it would be more appropriate now. One thing that event organizers are having to do is use carbon calculators to track absolutely everything. And if you haven't played around with one, there are plenty of free ones available online. You can just go on Google and find one. Organizations like Green Cycle or Reset Connect will give you an online one for free just to play about with. And it's quite intense. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy, but I think it's important for people to remember that it's all about gradual reduction. It's to look at an event and go, where can I just make a little more improvement? Where's the next marginal gain? It's not a checkered flag, finish line, I've got to get to here. It's where can we do better? Where can we do better?
Yeah, that's exactly what Luba said, wasn't it? She said you don't reach a point where you say, yes, I've reached sustainability, tick, job done. It's something we have to work towards constantly. Yeah, Anna, you had an interesting point about virtual events, which I'm keen for you to make.
Yes, we'll keep talking about how remote events or events from home are more sustainable sometimes because we're not traveling, right, which is the bulk of the carbon emission. But sometimes in that, when we're so obsessed in reducing the carbon footprint that we're not considering what we're not gaining from that event actually happening. We see that in our region, and I suppose is the case for many other regions in the world, outside probably Europe, where because those events are happening online, they're not happening on site, and that means that the communities where that meeting would have taken place, they're not receiving that income from the visit, they're not receiving the exposure, they're not receiving all those artisans that are working on their arts and crafts, they're not selling them anymore, so they're actually losing their livelihoods because we're so obsessed with making them sustainable that maybe they're more environmentally sustainable, but they're less socially sustainable. So how one pillar offsets the other pillar.
May I just add to that? I mean, that's absolutely right, and that's when we're advocating to the UK government, we have the value creation and value consumption arguments, and they're both important. And the value consumption is what you're talking about. It's the heads on beds, the bums on seats, the hotel occupancy and how many people are in the bars. And just a quick statistic to lay some context. In Liverpool, which is one of our big cities in the northwest of England, before the pandemic, events alone, just events, were worth £3.3 billion to the city, employed 38,000 jobs, and was responsible for 42% of the business rates, which is what businesses pay towards the council every year. Huge numbers, just the events industry.
And then it's nice that you mentioned jobs as well, because also for the interpreters in the regions where those meetings were taking place, I mean, we're losing out if those institutions are doing the meetings online from the headquarters, usually in Europe or in the US. those regions, I mean, those interpreters who work in the regions where the events would have been taking place and are losing those days of work as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that threatens the sustainability of the profession in those regions. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And Liverpool, I mean, that's even before the Eurovision Song Contest.
It is.
So if it's important for events organisers to make their events sustainable, how do they go about proving that that's the case? That's the next question. And Raisa is going to help us out here. Raisa, as you heard, is an expert in standards. So Raisa, can standards help?
Well, of course, the whole purpose of ISO standards, if we talk about international standards and best practice, is to do exactly what Professor Zarski there told us. So they are not designed to be checklists or add-ons, but they're designed to enable organizations and service providers to review their processes critically and to take this holistic view, implement best practice as defined by an international standards body, and to demonstrate compliance. So in the event space, there is, of course, ISO 20121 on sustainable events. And that standard sets out the requirements for an event sustainability management system. So it's a management system standard, which depends on commitment from all levels and functions within the organization and outside it. And this standard sets out the requirements for the sustainability management system to be flexible and integrated. And again, specifically, to not just be an add-on or a checklist to tick, but critically a comprehensive process, and crucially, its influence needs to extend throughout the supply chain. And this is where we come into our space. So key elements of ISO 20121 are accessibility, inclusivity, impact, and best practice, but also monitoring and measurement. So how do you ensure that what you do has got an impact? What does it do? How does it influence the society and the environment around you, but also social aspects like we just talked about in terms of jobs and services in the local area. So this standards takes into account all of that throughout the supply. So being supply chain, so being able to ensure that all throughout client specifications are being met and the organization understands and takes into account what goes on within their sustainability chain. And of course, for the interpreting sector, we also have ISO standards. We have ISO 18841 on interpreting services, which is, if you like, the umbrella standards for interpreting services on the whole. And then we have ISO 23155 on conference interpreting specifically. And while sustainability of events is not a major part in these standards, I think their value is in addressing the wider question of what is a fit for purpose, sustainable way of delivering quality and value to the client, and demonstrating compliance to client specifications and industry best practice, while ensuring that interpreters themselves are carrying out their role and tasks in a way that supports long-term sustainability of the profession. So to me here, interpreting fits into this. How do we ensure that client specifications, client concerns are being met? And how do we continue to deliver a sustainable interpreting service, regardless of what the mode and the format of the delivery is, so that it adds value to the client and their event?
Thank you very much. And that's there are some subjects there that we're going to definitely be returning to after the coffee break. But there are other ways in which events organisers can demonstrate that their events are sustainable. And Martin's going to tell us about those now.
Yeah, really, it's very much going back to the carbon calculators, and we're seeing more and more of that. And an individual can do it as well as a business, and it really does drill down onto every level. So it will tell you how much fuel you'll use or your carbon emissions if you are driving on your own, or whether you're carrying people because it will add the weight, or even if you're carrying leaflets in the boot of the car. So it really does sort of break down absolutely everything. It's not infallible. So if you are hosting an event for 1,000 people, how could you possibly know how everyone travels to that event, whether they drive to the Excel Centre in London or they get the train? You're not going to be able to record that. But carbon calculators is the main tool now where people are going. The other more interesting component part here is B Corp certification, which we're starting to see now very much at grassroots. Could I ask you, has anyone heard of B Corp? You've heard of B Corp? Few people in the room. So this is very new. I say very new. It's been around for a little while, but the take-up isn't huge yet. It's still growing. In essence, a B Corp is a regular business like yours or mine, which has been very thoroughly audited and assessed for absolutely everything. The process depends how big your company is, but say for a typical 100-person size company, the process would be between 12 and 18 months. And that is a full auditing program. It costs about $300 to do it. You have to redo it every 2 or 3 years, I think, to maintain that status. And that really is the only accreditation scheme that I am aware of that actually monitors everything you do. And it's not just about your environmental impact, it's how you treat your employees, how you look after them. If you're running an event, yes, how you treat your delegates, again, that would be measured too. You know, all the staff benefits. So B Corp certification is something I think we're going to start seeing more of. And more event agencies, which are largely the ones who are employed to run all these big events that many of you go to work at, are starting to go down that road now. There's about 5 or 6 in the UK already. It's a global organization. I think it's based in the US. I think they've got maybe about 3,000 companies around the year which are B Corp certified, something like that. But that, I think, is going to be the future of measurement.
Thank you. Thank you all. We don't have long before the coffee break, but I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask our panelists at this stage, I can remind you that you may speak French or English. So if anyone has a question, otherwise we'll go for the coffee break and we'll get on to the interpreting side of things after that coffee break. There's one question over there.
Hello, I have a question for Alexandra. Do you have some good practices to share with us, maybe when you organize interpreting teams or as an interpreter yourself, maybe about your logistics or what you do to be more sustainable?
Yes, I do have some practices, both as an interpreter and as a conference interpreter. But this is going to be discussed in details during the session after the coffee break. So you're preempting that second session, but thank you for the question.
That's exactly what everyone wants to know, of course, and we'll be devoting plenty of time to that after the coffee break. Any questions? No, I'm not surprised. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've set the scene, we've got the context, we understand now what we mean by sustainable event, we understand what trends we're seeing, and we understand what the concerns of meeting organisers are when they're organising, when they're designing their events. And after the break, we'll be discussing how we, as consultant interpreters and as interpreters, can feed into that. So enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you in half an hour.
Test, test. Okay. Coffee break is served just outside the room, next to the registration desk. Thank you. Test, test. Okay. Hello, can we please slowly come back? We would like to resume the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be resuming as soon as you get back to the room, as soon as possible. It's 11:15. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to take your seats, please, and we'll get started. Okay, then they'll come. Okay, I'll just get started. Right, we're going to get started with the next part of our panel discussion. Just give you a moment to take your seats. Martin has just quipped that people think the hardest thing about events is making them sustainable, but actually it's getting people back from the coffee break. So I borrowed your joke there. So we've heard a lot about what a sustainable event is. We've heard about trends in sustainable events, and I think we've already got a lot of food for thought. In this second part of the morning, we are going to be considering how we in IEC, how we as consultant interpreters and as interpreters can contribute to making an event more sustainable. And so this really does pick up on the question that was asked right at the end before the coffee break. And as I said earlier, we can start with the positive thought that just by being there, we're making an event more sustainable because we're making it more inclusive and we're enabling the value created by an event to be greater. But how can we in IEC improve the sustainability of the service we provide? And we're going to turn first of all, of course, to Alexandra. As a consultant interpreter then, how can consultant interpreters contribute to increased sustainability?
Thank you, Louise. Yes, indeed, you didn't hear me much in the first session, but you will hear me now, don't worry. As a consultant interpreter, I truly believe that I am not the culprit in flying interpreters around the world and, aggravating climate change. I believe that I contribute to sustainability in the wide definition that we heard this morning from Professor Zarski. And I've asked for the SDG to be put behind me. My language combination is French A, English B, with German and Italian. But with A and B, French and English, I work a lot in Africa. So I know a little bit about sustainability and how to take it in continents that want to develop. But Europe, North America, South America, Asia also need to develop in a sustainable way. For us, it means choosing, not the 17 SDG, but choose 2 or 3 that you want to concentrate on. So my favorite ones for my business is, first of all, number 3, which is good health and well-being. Good health and well-being will contribute to the sustainability of our profession as interpreters. So when I recruit my teams, this is a point I really insist on with my clients. I want to give the interpreters I recruit the right working conditions. We've known that in the pandemic, we lost so many of our colleagues. Some got injured, some got burnt out, some got so stressed by the number of screens they had to look at for RSI, they said, this is not the profession I signed up for. And rather than helping them or saying, it's okay, we can cope, an airline pilot can look at so many screens and has the responsibility of all the passengers. I can do it. I'm sure if I train, I can do it. Even the video referees in a football match or in a rugby match, they have to watch so many screens instantly. Now, quickly, reply, which angle is the best? Did he score? Was he offside? No, yes. So if a football referee can do it and has been trained for that instead of running around the pitch, I can also do that. So by helping training our colleagues, we can do that. Then we can make our colleagues aware that bad sound is dangerous for our health. It means that, for example, when you're not actively interpreting, reduce the volume. So I always try to make sure that my clients are aware of that. We want to avoid further injuries, and that's not just, oh, I worked in a hub and it was so small and there was no space to breathe and there was no oxygen and there was no daylight. There's no daylight in this room. All the hubs I have compulsory natural daylight, for example. This is especially when you're jet lagged. Oh, yes. My mistake. There is daylight, except it's a dark January day. Apologies to Ireland. Then there's also the SDG number 4. I like that one, quality education. Education is raising awareness of a lot of elements. So you've seen, I'm sure, especially since the pandemic, the number of webinars that clients are doing. Louise, you talked about, and Anna, about social inclusion. Those webinars are now accessible to people who would never have been able to go to a meeting room. But now from home, wherever they are, or even from their phone, they're able to take a 1-hour training session on how to plant a seed better, on how to be a better doctor, on how to use Zoom, on anything else that you can think of. So yes, I contribute to SDG number 4 when I'm motivated to interpret for the people that are on the other side of the world who don't know me. I won't see them on site, but I know you need that message. So even though I'm on my own, I'm not in a comfortable room here with coffee outside with lovely colleagues to smile at, but I can still contribute by doing the best I can as an interpreter to convey what the speakers are saying. And finally, of course, SDG number 13, that's climate action. Well, that's the big thing, and we always think of travel. And at the beginning of the pandemic, to help my clients, of course, I couldn't send my interpreters on site to their buildings or the hotel rooms they had chosen. So immediately, I said, I need to send my interpreters to a safe place where they can still do quality work and not feel too scared. So I set up 5 hubs in about 2 months in 5 different countries. So I set them up where my interpreters were. So I didn't have to force them across the border. And I told my technicians everywhere in Europe, I trained them, and I said, I want a large booth. I used the AIC principles for remote interpreting hubs. The guidelines, they do exist. So 1 large booth per interpreter. Technicians with a mask, technicians with direct visibility of the interpreters. I refused any screen that was in the booth. I said, screens inside the booth is like watching TV, 30 centimeters from your eyes. You wouldn't let your 3-year-old do that. Yet we let ourselves do that 4-5 hours, really close, on top of our laptops. Screens outside the booth. Where outside the booth? At least a meter. You need your eyes to rest. And resting your eyes means not always being like this, but being able to look in the middle distance. So put 2 booths and 2 booths face to face. All of a sudden, the interpreters can see each other. They say, oh, yes, that's better. I look up, I'm not alone. I can relax. I can concentrate on my work. If I have a problem, somebody else can take it. What height? Very often, technicians will put the screens at that height. Why? Because they're typically male and typically taller than me. So they stand up and they say, yeah, I can see. Except the interpreters are sitting down in the booth. And if they are not as tall as Bertold or as you here, it means we end up going up and down. Documents, this, console, screen, console. And then you get neck ache, you get headache, you can't concentrate. And then the interpreter doesn't perform well, the client is not happy. It is a small change. And the tip is the top of the screen, 20 centimeters below your eye line when you're sitting down. And ask the client to tell the technicians. The technicians is to sit down in the booth and see, and is the middle partition of the booth really not hiding half the screen, because you end up like this, and then you got backache. And then you can't come to my next conference because you hurt your back. So health and well-being. Travel. Hubs, I set them up there, which means that my clients who now keep using the hubs after the pandemic, because they're also conscious of the CO2 emissions, have asked me for statistics. And recently, I calculated. I use the same interpreters as I used before, but instead of sending them around Europe, I sent them to their local hub. And A local interpreter for me is about 60 kilometers from the hub. I went from using 4% local interpreters between January and April 2019 to using 50% local interpreters between January and April 2022. So it's a massive increase. The interpreters are okay, and my CO2 emissions have dropped dramatically. So as a consultant interpreter, they're the first things I think of, the 3 SDG that I like.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. You've mentioned how you try to work towards 3 different SDGs. I think the most interesting part was about hubs, actually, and the way that hubs have enabled you to weather the pandemic and contribute to business continuity. But also, since the pandemic, as we're coming out of the pandemic, you're still using the hubs, and that's enabled you to increase the proportion of interpreters who are local. And I don't know if Raisa is still there, hiding behind the SDG slide. Yeah. Could we see the Zoom screen? Yeah. Raisa, hello. You were hidden by the SDGs there. But Raisa, Alexandra mentioned some of the characteristics of a good interpreting hub. We know that some are better than others, and we had a lot of examples. I believe there's an ISO standard being developed on interpreting hubs. Could you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with what Alexandra you mentioned as well about this being, in a way, a critical time for us as a profession to ensure that the rush or emergency solutions that came out and were being developed throughout the pandemic now continue to be developed into sustainable long-term solutions. And clearly, Alexandra, you were one of the first people to actually take decisive action here. And crucially, that the technology of, for example, RSI, enables multi-location events where it makes sense and adds value to the client, or is a requirement and necessity without compromising the event. So it's great to hear that IEC already has best practice guidelines for remote interpreting booths. There is also a new working group, which is the first stage in the journey of an ISO standard. So a working group at ISO currently building the foundations of a new standard for remote interpreting hubs, specifically with this in mind, because hybrid or remote event solutions shouldn't also be an add-on or a second-rate solution, but a viable solution for the long term. And we, as the industry professionals, we need to ensure that we understand the challenges around that and are able to advise our clients and implement solutions, and understand the potential impact of those solutions. And so not just the environmental, but also these really wide social impacts that they can have for the profession, and to ensure that the solutions that we put in place for the longer term are viable also for the profession as well as the client side.
Exactly, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. But another interesting point is that we're now seeing, as Martin told us before the break, a return to on-site events. And I'm sure all of us have noticed that in our work over the last year or so. And this raises a very thorny issue. So I thought I would play devil's advocate just for a moment and ask Alexandra another question. And that is, given the high carbon footprint of transport, can we ever justify interpreters travelling to meetings when it's technically possible for the interpretation to be provided remotely?
It is true that technically now we have the tools, they're not perfect, but they are improving. And in a few years, we will have very good quality sound coming from internet cables. But clients need to meet face to face. And there are different reasons to justify an on-site meeting. There could be confidentiality. Some meetings are so sensitive that they cannot go outside of 4 walls. That means the interpreters need to be there at the max, maybe with a booth and a safe technician. But they need to be there. Or sometimes there is no meeting room. and the client is visiting a prison and need the interpreters with them, or in the coffee breaks and the lunch breaks for diplomatic events where they really need to talk to each other without the risk or even the knowledge that somebody can listen in. So we saw in the diplomatic world that they tried online, and it was so stale and it was so fraught with misunderstandings that it's only when you meet on site that you can. And what Martin was saying is true. They will prepare their on-site event by a succession of virtual meetings. That's fine, but at some point we need to meet. Look, we're all here. We're all here because we're desperate to see each other in 3D again. So on-site meetings are there to stay. But for me, on-site meetings are with interpreters in the room, whether in the booth or in the room, are very important for quality. I want quality for my clients. And some interpreters will say, I'm trained now, I can do it fine on my own. I don't think my quality has dropped. Are you sure about that? I'm an interpreter myself. When I have my colleague next door to me, whether it's in the next booth for COVID protection, through the glass, or, if we both tested negative right next to me, and she writes down an acronym for me, bing, I'm a little bit better. And she looks up a fish for me, bing. Or an African lake, bing, I'm a little bit better. Okay, if I miss that African lake, the delegates are fine. They probably don't notice. The client doesn't see it. But I know. I always want 100%. And if I get 90% and sometimes 85%, and then there's all of a sudden, boom, somebody needs to be admitted to Zoom. Oh, good, I missed that one. Okay, so then I drop to 80%. My frustration means that I am not as good as usual. And that's also the case when your colleagues are sometimes so remote that they don't even check the chat or even the video that you've set up between yourselves as back channels. And I'm there gesticulating, and, oh, sorry, she's just looking at her other screen because she's got 3 screens. And she doesn't see me there going, I'm in trouble. So teamwork will increase quality. Increased quality will mean a happier client. A happier client means also a client that's ready to pay more for you and your services. There is also, and I'm coming back to my bugbear, which is the health and well-being of interpreters. That's the motivation. We will need a balance between sometimes being comfortable doing a 2-hour webinar, and I can earn that without having to fly back from a venue at midnight, being jet lagged like poor Anna is at the moment. But weren't you all excited at the idea of coming here? Right? Despite the travel, despite the cold, despite the fact that your luggage was lost, you're still happy to be here. And when I go to the booth, I have on my calendar, I have day 1, day 2, day 3, I've got on-site. On Thursday, I'm going to Frankfurt. Yes. And I'm going to work with this and this, and I haven't seen them since the beginning of the pandemic. You go there. How many hugs did we see? How many photographs did we see? Even the technicians, and long-suffering Bernard here, who's known me for over 20 years, the technicians are happy to see us back because it's boring for them just behind the screen as well. And we work as a team, even though we complain at them, where's the sound not better? But there's not much they can do in our side. So on-site is good for your motivation. That means it's good for your mental health. And if you're happier, you interpret better, you're more relaxed, your voice can be heard. And there's also the safety aspect. We know that toxic sound is bad, and exposure to toxic sound needs to be reduced. We can't eliminate it completely, but good old analog sound that goes from this microphone to the 2 interpreters in the booth at the back is so much safer. So by alternating on-site and virtual, you reduce your exposure to toxic sound. So yes, meeting is key, and for my clients, I now emphasize the health and safety aspects.
Thank you. You've explained that brilliantly, and I'm so happy to hear that long list of reasons that we can use with our clients to persuade them that the interpreters also need to be on site, and how that's a benefit for the client. Clearly, it's beneficial for us and for our profession, but it's beneficial to the client as well. Thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm going to turn now to Anna, because Anna is here representing us as interpreters. And Anna, you've been thinking very hard, very carefully about what you can do to make your own work more sustainable, despite perhaps living in a more far-flung region. Would you like to tell us, please, about, I'm sure everyone's going to be very anxious to hear about all the different initiatives that you've put in place.
Well, I hope they're going to be even more anxious when I finish. Because my objective within the next few minutes is to make you all very uncomfortable. I'm going to speak to you from the perspective of a rank interpreter. I don't have my own clients, maybe a few. I could consider myself a boutique consultant interpreter, but like most of you, I'm just a rank interpreter. I have no power decision on who's on my team, where the venue is going to be, how I'm getting to that venue. I have the only decision power that I have is on what I do as an individual, as a professional conference interpreter. So maybe I should share with you the fact that you probably know this by now, but Asia Pacific is a very, very wide region. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to try and be as general as possible, but of course I'm biased by my own situation. I am the only Spanish interpreter in Asia. There are colleagues in Australia, but Australia is even farther away, which means that I'm basically I am the local Spanish booth for a region that goes from Turkey to the Pacific Islands and from Korea, Mongolia to New Zealand. That basically means that I live on a plane. I estimated, and that's the first step when you want to have some conscious approach to your sustainability, by doing a calculation, an estimation of my carbon footprint. I estimated, so I did some research, and the average person in Singapore produces around 8.5 tons of CO2 per year. My carbon footprint just from work was 23 tons. If you add on top of that the 8.5, I'm 4 times more pollutant than the average person in Singapore. So obviously I had to do something about it, right? What can I do, knowing that I have no influence on all of that? That was my question. What can I do? So I'm going to give you the list of questions that I've been asking myself since I moved to Singapore 6 years ago. I hope that you're very, very uncomfortable with this. At least one of 2 questions. The idea is to trigger some thought and some thinking. Starting from the flights and the traveling, I cannot take a train, so I have to take a plane. So again, as the professor was saying, I started asking myself, what are the most sustainable airlines in my region? Do I have a direct flight? You know that planes are more pollutant on takeoff and landing. So if you have a direct flight, you're going to be less pollutant than if you have multiple stayovers. Same thing as light traveling. Like, how many pairs of shoes do I need for a 3-day event? Can I travel without a check-in baggage, for instance? Business class, this is a tricky one. Can I do a 7-8-hour day flight on economy? Business class tickets are 3 times more pollutant than economy class. I know this is not very popular, but just putting it out there. Things like when I arrive to the airport, is there a bus or do I have to take a taxi? How convenient is that? Where do I stay? Sometimes, sometimes this is not up to you, but sometimes you can book your own hotel. There are more and more booking websites where you have the index, the ecological index of the lodging. So you can find and compare the different hotels or the different options in the city where you're going, and you can see which ones are more sustainable than others. And then another thing that is very important, that is very easy, the low-hanging fruit that we're talking about, is your behavior once you're there. So once I arrive to a different, I'm in Bali, this dreamy paradise, and I have this huge bathtub there, and I have my children, no laundry to do, and I'm really tempted. I would really like to take a bath, but is that really necessary in a city where, in an island where there's not much water? Do I need to take that bath? Do I need the AC full blasting all day long? Do I need to leave the lights on? I've learned recently that something very convenient. Do I need my bed done every day? Do I need my toilet clean every day? I don't clean my toilet at home every day. Leaving the do not disturb sign on prevents anyone from coming into your room. So basically, that means that you're saving all those chemical products that go into cleaning your bathroom every day, which is probably not necessary. I'd like to touch upon a thing that also under environmental sustainability that we haven't talked about and sometimes we overlook, and it's also low-hanging fruit, and it's virtual waste. So all those emails that we send, the cloud is not, all those emails and all those messages, they're not floating somewhere outside on the sky. They're actually in data centers. So it's estimated, the German statistics agency has estimated that there's over 7.2 million data centers around the world. And that right now, according to the European Commission, they take about 1 or 2% of the electricity consumption in the world. Most of these data centers are huge. They're sometimes the size of 10 football fields. And they take up a lot of energy just on cooling. It is actually estimated that by 2030, it'd be 3% of the electricity consumption. So do we really need to acknowledge every single message that we receive? I mean, if your recruiter, if your consultant interpreter asks you to acknowledge the receipt of an email, please do it by all means, please. But if it's not really necessary, do we need to send that thank you? Or do we need to reply all? Okay. So moving on to social sustainability. I think, social sustainability is about the impact that we have on the people around us, both positive and negative. And when I was thinking about the kind of questions that I ask myself and that I'd like to ask you as well, I approach it from two perspectives. As what we can do as individuals, as interpreters, towards the society at large, and what we can do towards our community of interpreters. So the impact of interpreters on community, we already said we're at 2 for social inclusion, so yay, kudos to us. But how do we engage with the communities when we're working? I mean, again, I'm talking from my perspective when I'm always visiting a foreign community. Do I stay in my fancy resort and do I eat the food from the hotel? That's usually pretty good. Or do I dare going out of the compound and actually interact with the local communities? Do I make sure that maybe I visit some kind of social initiative? What is my interaction? Do I bargain to the dollar? Because I don't want to be ripped off at that little market, that little artisan. He wanted to charge me $5 more for this scarf. Am I aware of my privilege, of the wealth that I have, that what those $5 represent for me? What do they represent for that little artisan? On the impact that we have as interpreters on our community. And this is a sensitive topic. And I wasn't going to say this because I didn't want to be perceived as naive. But because I have the microphone and I have 100 colleagues listening to me, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We have an impact on each other. And if your recruiter thinks you're high maintenance, if your colleagues think they should be paid more to work with you, if the client thinks you're a diva, or if the technicians feel that you're mistreating them, your business is not sustainable. So the bar is not very high here. No one is asking us to be creatures of light and rainbows and share love and kindness. And no, we don't need to go that far. The questions that I ask myself, because we all have bad days, we know how this is. The questions that I ask myself is, am I being professional? Am I being collegial? And am I being respectful? I think that's the bottom line. And then if you feel like you're in the mood, the stars are aligned, and you feel like taking a step forward, you could also think about creating community. I ask myself, am I creating a community of interpreters? And I find in particular for those of us who live in low density interpreting regions, the loneliness that we feel is very powerful, and it can have an impact on our sustainability as an interpreting community. So am I doing something to contribute to that sense of community among interpreters? I have so many issues. Can I keep going?
Give us a list of the last few, Anna. This has been absolutely fantastic.
so well, there are things about gender equality that we could touch upon, and how for a very feminine profession, we see an incredible high number of men in hiring positions and in roles of responsibility. An incredible high number of men also representing our profession and negotiating on our behalf. Things like accents, or in the Spanish booth, I won't talk about all the booths, you all know what I'm talking about, but in the Spanish booth, for instance, there's the whole debate between Latin American and Castilian. The French booth, I won't even go there. And maybe linked to governance, which is, as we were saying, maybe less relevant for us, but I think there are two issues there that are very important, especially for interpreters in the private market. One of them is taxes. Do we declare every single assignment that has to be declared? And I hope that you'll feel uncomfortable here. And then the other thing, and especially in the world of distance interpreting, is becoming a whole issue on how you handle options and how we handle requests for availability and how we're double booked. And so do I handle this in a sustainable way? And I will have more, but I'm going to leave it here.
I think there'll be lots of questions for you at the end, Anna. Thank you so much. What really struck me actually were, well, a few things. I thought your approach is data-led, which is something that Professor Zarski said in her interview at the beginning. And it also, another thing that she said that you picked up on was the idea of working with partners. So researching the best airlines to fly with, for example. So that tied in very nicely. And the other thing that struck me was how detailed your approach is. You really are examining every aspect of the operation to try to identify not only the low-hanging fruit, the easy things, but also the more tricky things. And then, of course, I think we were all struck by your comments about professionalism, supporting colleagues, and behaving ethically. And that's all part of sustainability as well. So this is a really broad discussion. Thank you. I'm going to turn back to Raisa now, because I'd like to just move the debate towards showing that we're sustainable. So Alexandra and Anna have given us lots of ideas for how we are sustainable, how we strive to be sustainable. How can we show that? And again, coming back to standards and certification, which you're an expert in, Raisa, is that one tool that we can use for that purpose?
Yes, absolutely. I think implementing and being certified to your industry best practice can be a really powerful way of making you think, and then demonstrating that you do think about how you operate and how your services are delivered, just like Anna said, how you comply with client requirements, and that you can demonstrate that you are in a position to understand how your services influence the people around you. And with ISO standards, there is a common misconception that ISO standards are only for companies to implement and get certified to. But in actual fact, they are designed for an organization, or in our case, an interpreting service provider of any size, if we think about the interpreting standards. And that includes individual freelance interpreters. So the way a certification process works is that you, of course, first need to get the standard and review its requirements against your own processes and the services that you deliver, and then develop those services, those processes, documentation, and plug any gaps that you find. And then you get in touch with a certification body, such as ATC certification in the UK, and you arrange a certification audit. And usually certification to ISO standards runs on a 3-year cycle. So there is an in-person certification audit followed by annual surveillance audits, and then the cycle starts again. The one thing that you can't do with implementing and being certified to ISO standards is pick and choose which parts to implement. Or you can, but you will not be able to get certified to the standard in that case. So if we think about ISO standards, and we mentioned the event sustainability standard earlier, it would be fairly difficult for an interpreting service provider to implement and get certified to the event sustainability standard. But an interpreter or an interpreting service provider will be able to get certified to their industry best practice standard, which is the conference interpreting standard, and through that showcase their compliance to their clients' requirements and their commitment to their industry best practice. And of course, B Corp certification, like Martin already mentioned, is a different way of going about. But in all of these, I think the same trend runs through here, in that interpreting service providers within the event management, the event organizing supply chain, are an integral part of that supply chain. So they need to be able to bring their best practice, their compliance to the table, and help the clients to demonstrate that what they do carries throughout the supply chain. So absolutely, individual interpreters can get certified to ISO standards. The cost of certification, of course, will vary from one certification body to another, but I can talk on behalf of ATC certification. What we do, because we're an industry specialist certification body, our cost to individual freelance suppliers is half the cost to small companies. So typically at the moment, certifying an individual interpreter to the new conference interpreting standard would be about 1,100 euros for the certification audit. So a live audit process, that's year one, and then 600 euros in years 2 and 3 of the interpreting cycle. Now, I've been involved and integrally working in the ISO standards field for many years, starting with the implementation of some of the early translation services standards 15 years ago. And to me, having implemented ISO standards and having been involved in the development of these standards for many years, for me, the essence really is that they can be a really powerful strategic investment to your business that essentially brings up this thought of partnership. Your compliance, implementation, and certification can be a really powerful signal to your partners that you're a committed professional who is able to demonstrate compliance to international standards requirements and client specifications and industry best practice. So here again, we come to this idea of us as professionals being able to advise and consult our clients to find the right solutions for the right type of service.
That was so informative. Thank you very much. I mean, I don't know how many people in the room have considered getting certified to an ISO standard 23155. It was interesting to hear the exact cost as well and the process. It makes it seem like something that might be possible, perhaps. Yeah. And I think also the advantage of that is that you're then speaking to events organisers in a language they understand, presumably. Now, and some interpreters are certified to 23155. It's a new standard, as you might know, but people are starting to be certified to that standard. Of course, it's not the only way one can show that one is sustainable, and I'd be curious to know, Alexandra, whether you advertise yourself as a sustainable provider of interpreting services, and if so, how?
Yes, I do. I'm lucky enough to be a member of Calliope Interpreters, and a few of our members are passionate about the environment. And already 15 years ago, two of our members took the lead in saying, look, we're flying a lot, and it's bad for the planet. That was quite early, Martin, you'd say, even 15 years ago. And they said we should calculate our emissions and try to offset them. So we started about using the first calculators, it was not easy, to precisely have statistics on all the interpreters we have recruited in all the members of Calliope and all the regions of the world that we cover. How much did we spend in tons? And it was a very difficult exercise and time-consuming exercise, but it was worthwhile. And then we got the comparison of each other. And of course, those like Anna who live in a region where flying is a minimum of 6 or 7 hours, had different figures to people who live in Paris and recruit around Paris, of course. But once we had the figures, we said, okay, we need to do something about it. And we decided to plant trees. And the first time we planted trees was in Brazil. So we started there. The second year, same exercise. Some of us had become more aware. Again, that's SDG 4, that's the education. Actually, I am producing a lot of emission. Can I recruit Pablo this time instead of Pedro? And then Pedro, maybe I'll put him somewhere else because he lives closer to the next conference. So then we planted trees in California. One of our members is based in California. Do you remember they had been devastated by forest fires? So every time we take something that is genuinely close to us, and we planted trees in California, then one of our members did a series of conferences on how to save endangered species. So off we go to Uganda and protect the habitat on chimpanzees. So it is a personal decision for our network where we go. And then we moved on to the blue economy and the danger of oceans being polluted. So this time we went after the hurricane in the Philippines, we planted more mangroves in the Philippines. This is ongoing. Every time those organizations, they send us a certificate. We write a blog on our social media and we display the certificate. And I also display the certificate in some of my quotes to my clients to say, look, we are walking the talk here. This is a concrete proof. We didn't do that certificate on our Word document ourselves. It was received by an NGO that is recognized. So this campaign needs to carry on, but we need to expand it, maybe. The process is ongoing. We don't have all the answers. Maybe we carry on with some trees, but now everybody's doing trees. So maybe we need to imagine something else. Let the others do trees and find the next product that doesn't get so much attention, maybe. I don't know, it could be cosmetics, it could be all sorts of things. It's not enough, though, if Calliope interpreters and consultant interpreters try to influence their clients and the interpreters they recruit. The whole of AIC has a reach of over 3,000 interpreters who in turn, like good COVID spreaders, can spread the good word to their clients, to their colleagues that we can't reach ourselves. And for that, I'm going to ask the technicians maybe to put a proposal that we have. It turns out that Calliope interpreters just had their annual meeting for the last 3 days here in Dublin and in the Wicklow Mountains. And we've been brainstorming, saying, oh, Alexandra is coming to the panel on sustainability. Instead of talking problems, can we talk solution? And we have this proposal, which I'm going to read in French. Les interprètes de conférences sont invités à respecter l'environnement et à minimiser leur empreinte carbone autant que faire se peut dans leur déplacement, leur consommation, leur utilisation d'outils numériques et dans toutes leurs activités. This is something that if we all put at the bottom of an email or in a quote or in an email to a colleague, or turn it into something pretty and put it somewhere on your social media saying, we advertise this as AIC members, bring it to the next PRIMS tomorrow, bring it to the next assembly. And maybe it gets the strength of AIC and the message spreads further. And I think it's not a bad thing. You're all here because you were interested in this panel and we're trying to give you some tools. And I'll come back, if you allow me, Louise, to one of the points that Anna mentioned. Reply to all and say thank you. As a consultant interpreter, I do like to know, did my interpreters receive my documents, or something like that. But already, maybe I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, I stopped sending documents by emails because they're very heavy and I send them to 8 people. So it's not just one message I sent, it's effectively 8 messages I have sent. And then I have to send a new version, another 8 messages. And then they reply, sorry, what version was that? and I'm not sure I got them. And then they reply to, oh, yes, you got them. That's too much. That's data center. So we have an online document storage system that is secure. I tell my interpreters for today, here's the password for your folder. So it's very secure for the client. And I put them there. And no, I don't say, I just added document to there, go and see that. No, it's your responsibility as interpreters to say, keep going there. You know it. If you work for the European Commission, the United Nations, they have the system. You don't bother the chief interpreter saying, where are the documents? You know where they are. And you keep checking even until the last minute. Did that speech arrive? That has saved so many emails from my laptop. So think again before you reply to all or send an email.
Thank you very much, and it's great to have this specific proposal that for people to consider using some text. Anna, do you advertise yourself as a sustainable interpreter?
I actually don't. Maybe I should. I don't find myself. I don't think I'm particularly sustainable. I mean, I try really hard to offset, which is like cleaning up after myself. I think sustainability, though, is part of a wider package. I think that the basic package for an interpreter is probably your language combination and your domicile. But then there's added value, and added value might mean being ISO certified, or being environmentally conscious, or there are other tools. And from the standing committee, that's something that we're working on. All the relationships with the mice industry, how conscious are you of the things around you? So I think, at least in my case, maybe I should, I don't know, but I take it as one of the things that make me. I don't want to say a better interpreter, but like it's part of the package. I think it comes in a package.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, all of you. We've reached the moment of the morning where we can open the floor for questions, and I expect there are a lot of questions for you. Raisa is still here on the screen if you have questions about ISO certification, Martin about events in general, Anna and Alexandra. So please raise your hands if you have a question, and Livia will bring you the microphone. Yes, Claudia first, and then there's a question at the back.
Hello, sorry for taking it to a very lower level, but I've always wondered why there isn't more carpooling and car sharing in events, including this. For example, I had to make my way from Dublin Airport to downtown, and whenever possible, I tend to favor public transport. So that's what I did. But suppose 3 or 4 of us were on the same plane. We just didn't know each other, and we didn't know we were heading to the same place. Are there any technical obstacles to, I don't know, having an app, a chat, a group, something for the techies of the world or of this room? I know there are quite a few that would allow us to share a car back. I mean, we usually do it on the way back because now we know who is here, but on the way to the meeting venue, we often don't know who else is going.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Great, Martin.
It's a really good question. In many cases, it's really up to the organizer. It's part of the planning. So theoretically, what organisers of this event could have done could have said, if anyone's interested in carpooling, join this WhatsApp group. And then you could have all chatted among yourselves and worked it out. That would be a very easy solution. For larger events, it's quite common, normally with the support of the local convention bureau, to set up signage at the airport. Shuttle buses are, increasingly common, particularly electric ones are now coming onto the market. But it's really up to the organizer to sort of stoke that conversation. So I think that's something all organisers can review.
Thank you. So again, it's something that's part of the design of the event, as we've been hearing. There was a question towards...
Can I add?
Yes, Livia, go ahead. Yeah.
Because as a consultant interpreter, this is something I do regularly in my events. I organize WhatsApp group for carpooling. It's not the event WhatsApp group. It's a separate one for carpooling. And I've been doing this regularly for about 4 or 5 years. For interpreters only, yes.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Thank you. There's a question just towards the back.
Hello, Manuela Wille from Hamburg, Germany. The German region started a sustainability process in October of last year. Actually, our training department came up with it. There's a system which is called CORE certification, C-O-R-E, and everyone interested was invited to join the meeting, the first one. And we had people from this core organization there who briefed us on what it means to become more sustainable and how we could approach it to get this official certification. And we started working on that. And we defined 3 different areas with 3 working groups. One was environmental aspects. The second one was health and safety. That's actually the one that I myself are working on. And the third one was relationships inside and outside the association, networking basically, how we could be more sustainable in this way. And so since October, we've been working on this step by step, and we want to achieve certification by the end of April of this year, both for the German region of AIC and also for the members of the working groups as individuals. And this has really been an exciting process, and all the input that we've received this morning, of course, is very helpful in this respect. So thank you very much for that. So it was just a comment, not a question.
No, but that's very inspiring because it shows us that there are other ways of demonstrating our commitment to sustainability, and also to examining the way we do things and assessing it against those standards. So thank you, Manuela. Would anyone else have a comment or a question? Maisie, I saw first, and then Tony.
Thank you. I'm Maisie Greenwood, based in London. I've got a question just going back to the first part of this part of the discussion, a question for Alexandra about the hubs. I've also worked with hubs, putting teams together. I'm just be interested to know, you said that you set up the hubs for your assignments. Did you set them up sort of from scratch, or did you work with conferencing interpreting equipment companies who already had hubs, or was it the equipment companies that was drastically setting up a hub to cater to the pandemic? And it also, how has it evolved since then? Because I've sort of seen the evolution of there were some hubs used at the beginning of the pandemic. The European Parliament, for example, has now moved away from that solution for various reasons. So I'd be interested to know kind of how sustainable the hub concept is, and and how functionally how it worked, and how was it a cooperation with the equipment providers or your independent initiative?
So it depends on the hubs. I first contacted a trusted equipment supplier here. It just so happens they are still trusted here because they are providing the booth as well. And I said, look, I won't be able to travel. There's a border ban. We can't leave Ireland for 1.5 years, and nobody can come here, and I need to work. And we discussed how we could do it. Still, obviously, right at the beginning, I still want my booth, I still want my console, and can you look after the rest? And they did. They found a meeting room. They only have a warehouse, and there was no way, for health and safety reasons, the interpreters could be in that warehouse. But they found a meeting room that they could rent for the day, and they would set up a pop-up hub, which is this booth with a big screen, and 2 booths, we tested it, and with a platform. So that was really with my local equipment supplier that I've known and trusted for years. And I thought, well, I like working with small suppliers. I'm going to do the same in other countries where are my interpreters. So I went to Germany, where I had a lot of my interpreters, and same thing. I contacted a colleague and I said, who is your trusted equipment supplier? And they said, okay, that's fine. This is the name of the company. And I called them and I said, look, you're obviously out of work at the moment because there are no conferences. What can you do? And I was on Zoom and I said, I want you to set up 2 booths. I'm going to send interpreters and we're going to test this and test relay from hub to hub, from Dublin all the way to Germany. And the first time they put the booth facing the wall. And then when the interpreter had a problem, the technician had to run, open the door and say, what's the problem? And I said, that didn't work. So, okay, we need to, by then the secretary was out of the office, reorganize your office, put the booth so that the interpreters can see each other, that the technicians can see the interpreters. And I had a base model which I then reproduced. I said, okay, some of my interpreters are in a different region of Germany and they can't even cross that little border. So set up another hub. Same thing. I contacted Christoph, who is regularly on my teams and who has a trusted equipment supplier. And I did the same. And then contacted colleagues, and that was Beth over there for Madrid. And I said, Beth, I need help. And there we worked together, and the first hub wasn't great, you know, the first setup, and the door was right next to the toilet. And I said, no, I don't want that. And so we turned it around, we jiggled it. Can we put a fourth booth? And the same again in Italy. So it was an enormous amount of work. And then talk to the technicians and say, you need to intervene. You are used to being at the back of the room and say nothing until maybe Louise goes and knocks on the thing, just bring your microphone up. You can't do that. You need to stop being shy. You need to turn on your microphone on Zoom. That means the technician needs to have a microphone and say, this is a message from the technical side or from the technician. Please come closer. And often you find people will react to the technician. They want the interpreters say they can't hear you. Oh God, those interpreters again. But if the technical, oh, the technician has told me I'm doing something really wrong. Okay, so you need to establish that good cooperation with the technicians. And for them, it's uncomfortable to speak, especially if their level of English is limited. But with a lot of encouragements, that's how it's working well. And I think there are a few people in the room, I can see nodding, because they regularly work in the hubs of painstakingly set up or helped set up or improved, and it has worked well.
Thank you. I think attention to detail is certainly a theme, isn't it, in all of this? Thanks for that. Tony had a question.
Thank you so much, Tony Rosado from the US. First of all, thank you so much. Congratulations to all five. This has been fantastic. I'm getting a lot of good ideas, inspiration, all kinds of things. So first of all, thank you. My question goes, I guess, to everybody, but especially to Alessandra, and it's also about hubs. Just a brief story. During the pandemic, we were confined for several months. After that, they started easing up a little bit the conditions. I am in Chicago. What we did is that we created hubs. There's a lot of TV shows that are filmed there, all those that start with the name Chicago, this and that. And those studios were vacant. Nobody was using them during the pandemic because they weren't filming, because the actors weren't there. So we kind of took over those facilities, and with the help of our regular technicians that we had been using forever, we worked there, and it was pretty good. Also, there were some other hubs from the bigger platforms, and they had very conveniently located hubs in downtown Chicago. After the pandemic ends and there's no more restrictions, a lot of these hubs decided to move from downtown Chicago, where we have a lot of good public transportation, subway, e-trains and all that, to some suburbs where you have absolutely nothing. They are in places where you have nothing but warehouses, very scary neighborhoods to come out at night, or in the hubs, you know, working in the middle of the night, and very long distances where people have to really drive to go there. So a lot of the interpreters are facing that problem. So my question is, what kind of environmental conscious advice you could give us to address that situation? Because I don't know how we're going to get these guys back to the city, to tell you the truth.
Yes, and this depends on the side of the city, on the size of the city you live on. You see, I live in Ireland, where wherever you come from around the world, you have to divide everything by 10 or by 100.
This is huge. Chicago is huge.
So Chicago is huge. It's true. Some of my hubs are quite close to the airport, so that's quite handy. It is true that many hubs are away from the city center, but a lot of my meetings only last for one day. You want a safe hotel, not too far from the airport, and then work. You need to have a vision, and you need to, and I work with small partners, because they are self-employed like me. They've got maybe one or two technicians, and they want to survive. That's the sustainable part. And I couldn't guarantee them any work. I didn't know how long that was going to last. I said, look, let's sign an agreement on price, and we will see where that leads us. And some of them got no work for 8 months. Some of them work for me 3 days a week. So they've seen that it has become sustainable. But it's not, let's go back to pre-pandemic. Let's forget we don't like the online. Technicians have to train themselves into being good, like the ones we have at the back. They're up, we need something, it comes up. And that's training. If they don't see that, if they say, oh, let's just wait because on-site is coming back. No, diversify your portfolio. We are diversifying our portfolio. Some of our events now, some of our meetings are RSI, others are on-site, others are still in consecutive, others are still with the bidule. And it takes some motivation to find a company that will also offer that service. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered part of it, yes. I know there's part that has no answer, but I really appreciate that.
I think Anna might have a
I'd like to add something on the hub issue. I think it's great that some regions found hubs as a useful tool, especially during the pandemic, but they're also becoming a tool for sustainability. But I'd like to just issue a word of caution, because it's not because it's sustainable in one place or in one city or for one specific institution that it's a universal tool that we can use everywhere and that will always be sustainable. We had someone during the pandemic, so a colleague from Mexico, who was saying, we have 2 hubs in my city and they're both in very scary neighborhoods. I'd rather work from home. And also, hubs were a good solution at the time, where that was where you had the good quality sound, you had the technicians with you, but also with time, it's been 3.5 years now, we can get similar conditions working from home. And again, because of the region where I come from, hubs is a concept that it just wouldn't work, because you don't have 2 interpreters in the same city. You can't put together a team working from a hub, and that is definitely not sustainable. Flying them to a hub wouldn't make any sense. So just a word of caution on hubs. They're one of the tools they can use that might work, be perfect for certain situations, but they cannot be used everywhere or taken as a universal solution.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Just
Anna.
clarify here. My portfolio is diversified. I do use hubs, but I also work from home, and I also recruit teams that work from home. Don't start thinking, oh well, she's got all the hubs, and she puts all her interpreters in the hubs. No, that's not the way it is. Of course, it's just an example.
No, it's tailor-made solutions. Different things work for different places and different clients. Absolutely. Danielle, you were next.
Merci. Danielle Gray, Espagne. Je vais parler français si je peux, pour mettre la durabilité en pratique. J'ai eu l'occasion de mettre sur pied un argumentaire pour l'un de mes clients, pour lui expliquer pourquoi, dans la mesure où il allait tenir un congrès en présentiel de nouveau au Danemark au mois de juillet, pourquoi les interprètes ne devaient pas rester chez eux et qu'ils devaient travailler sur place. Donc, je vais simplement vous donner quelques arguments que vous pouvez avancer lorsque vous n'êtes pas en position de force comme Alexandra l'est, dans la mesure où elle peut, un peu dicter ses conditions qui sont une garantie de qualité. Alors, il y a d'abord les aspects financiers que souvent les plateformes qui faisaient le siège de ce client mettent en avant. Moi, j'ai fait valoir qu'il vous fallait plus de techniciens pour un événement hybride, parce que c'est plus complexe, comme on l'a expliqué. Donc, plus de techniciens. Il vous faut au moins 1 ou 2 caméramens pour filmer l'événement et l'auditoire, les orateurs, les débats. Si vous passez par une plateforme d'interprétation, le coût est substantiel et conséquent, surtout qu'il s'agit d'un congrès en 4 langues qui, pour des journées normales de 6 à 7 heures, qui s'étale sur 9 ou 10 jours. Donc, vous passez par une plateforme que je ne citerai pas, la facture est salée. Si vous faites de l'interprétation à distance, pour des journées de 6 à 7 heures, chez moi, les effectifs sont doublés. Donc, ça fait 2 équipes complètes au lieu d'une seule. Alors que, par contre, si vos interprètes sont sur place, certes, vous devez louer 4 cabines, des consoles, des micros, payer l'hôtel et le transport, sauf pour les locaux, bien sûr. Mais si vous faites vos calculs, finalement, les économies sont dérisoires. Ça, c'était les aspects financiers. Pour les aspects environnementaux, j'allais faire venir peut-être une douzaine d'interprètes sur des milliers de délégués, parce que c'est un très gros congrès. Donc, une douzaine de billets par rapport à tous ceux qui allaient se déplacer, ça n'allait pas chercher loin. Ensuite, les outils digitaux ont quand même eux aussi une empreinte carbone. J'ai fait valoir que la technologie digitale était à l'origine de 4% des gaz à effet de serre et que la consommation d'énergie augmentait de 9% par an. Donc pour moi, tant qu'on n'avait pas de chiffres de la part des SIDP, de la part des plateformes d'interprétation sur leur consommation, on ne pouvait pas partir du principe que leur empreinte carbone était moindre. Ça, c'était les aspects environnementaux. Ensuite, il y avait les risques technologiques. Lorsque vous travaillez à partir de chez vous ou à partir d'un bureau, il n'y a pas de technicien. Donc, vous êtes à la merci d'une panne. Vous êtes aussi à la merci d'une coupure d'électricité dans le quartier ou d'une chute d'Internet. Et j'ai toujours la clause de laïque, comme quoi il n'y a pas de responsabilité pour les interprètes dans ce cas. Ensuite, si la qualité de l'audio ou de la vidéo est insuffisante, l'interprétation sera suspendue. Là aussi, j'utilise la clause standard de laïque. Donc, vous avez peut-être fait venir Renzo Piano pour votre congrès d'architectes. Si les interprètes n'entendent pas, ce sera perdu pour la postérité. Ça fait mouche. Ensuite, il y a la flexibilité du service. Si vous avez une équipe sur place dans le congrès, vous avez beaucoup plus de souplesse, beaucoup plus de flexibilité. Vous pouvez éventuellement ajouter une langue passive à l'improviste. Si vous avez un délégué italien qui vient vous voir en disant « Ah, j'ai un discours, je l'ai en italien, je ne peux pas le faire en autre chose », si vous avez 2 pivots dans l'équipe, vous pouvez peut-être envisager de donner ce petit coup de pouce à votre client. Ce genre de choses, vous ne pouvez pas le faire sur une plateforme qui a été pré-programmée. Ensuite, les petits dépassements d'horaire sont plus faciles à accepter parce que les interprètes ne sont pas sur les genoux s'ils sont sur place, contrairement à l'interprétation à distance où vous écopez de sons toxiques pendant des heures. Les changements de dernière minute, les remaniements d'équipe sont aussi plus faciles à mettre en œuvre s'il y a un changement. Et si vous avez un discours de dernière minute que vous avez tiré de la manche à un orateur, vous pouvez le photocopier ou le distribuer rapidement. Vous pouvez obtenir un PowerPoint d'un technicien, toute chose qu'il vous est extrêmement difficile de faire si vous êtes entre vos toilettes et votre cuisine. Et puis finalement, j'ai gardé le meilleur pour la fin, les arguments sanitaires, donc pour la santé. J'ai fait valoir que certes, la RSI pouvait être utile pour de petits webinaires, mais qu'après 2 ans de pandémie, nous étions quand même conscients et au courant des répercussions que cela avait sur la santé des interprètes. La perte d'acuité auditive, la charge cognitive, etc. J'ai fait la liste, j'ai mentionné les accidents du travail, étourdissement, nausées, sensibilité du nerf optique, qui sont souvent irréversibles. Il y a une centaine d'interprètes au Parlement européen sur 250 pour lesquels des accidents du travail ont été reconnus. Et j'ai aussi avancé que le risque sanitaire était aggravé par le fait que les orateurs souvent n'ont pas le bon équipement ou que le son est fortement comprimé dès qu'il passe par une plateforme. On l'a vu avec notre oratrice qui malheureusement n'a pas pu nous donner une qualité, une clarté de son comme on aurait pu l'espérer. Eh bien, voilà, là, j'ai eu un petit message de réponse me disant « Non, jetez plus, la cour est pleine, on vous attend au mois de juillet au Danemark. »
What a wonderful case study, Danielle. Loads of fantastic arguments that we can all use with our clients. Thank you very much. Yes, there's a question just behind Danielle.
Hi, William White, Berlin. I want to ask a fairly big but also fairly abstract question. At the risk of compromising our professional neutrality by identifying with the subject matter of a conference that we happen to be interpreting, to what extent is it possible for us to quantify the fact that the conference we're doing is actually making an environmental contribution? The conference itself is helping to preserve the environment. If I'm doing COP27, is that not a justification in its own right in terms of sustainability? Now, I say this as somebody who once did a conference about coal power stations, but in my defense, that was about making them slightly more efficient. And at the things were different, you know, that's what they say when they justify colonialism. Things were different then. But normally speaking, if you do a conference about electric vehicles, I would say, Or if it's a COP27, then that ought to be a justification in and of itself. It may be possible, I hope, that we can quantify that to some degree when it comes to other conferences. But perhaps the most extreme example would be negotiating a peace agreement.
Thank you very much. I think you could offset your COP conference against the coal-fired power station one. No, but that's a serious question. Would anyone like to comment on that? Martin?
That's literally the heart of my job. What you've just described is a perfect example, the COP events. And I know the agency that runs the ran COP26 and is in the frame for COP28, which is in Dubai. Absolutely. This comes back down to the very core of why the majority of events are happening in the first place, and that is to leave a lasting social legacy. And it transcends the rudimentary economic benefit to the destination. While that's important, the subject matter of your event will largely have global positive ramifications. And the COP example is one of the most obvious to find. The G7 summit, for example, again, you know, we might look at all those tired old men in suits and we might yawn and go, oh, they're just there for the jolly-up. But no, there is a tangible positive outcome of that event. Every healthcare association event, positive outcome. It's a fundamental part of your narrative. And, you know, I'm not that familiar with the interpreting industry, as it turns out, after what I've learned over the last couple of hours. But I think it's really important that you, as a sector, as a community, define your value proposition. Don't take for granted your role and your job. You can't expect all your event planners and your potential clients to fully appreciate the magic of what you do and understanding the nuance. Certainly in the MICE sector, we know technology is an enabler. It's there to help, but it's not a replacement for the serendipity and the progress. But I think that sustainable, positive legacy piece needs to be a fundamental part of your vocal campaigning and any marketing that you do. That has to be fundamental. You have to be able to demonstrate what you do, not just in terms of emissions, but in terms of your positive legacy. Sorry, that was a bit washy, but...
Not at all. That was fantastic. Thank you. I have three more. We're running out of time. Yeah, there's a question at the back. Anna has a question at the front, and Claire has a question. I'd definitely like to take those three, and then I'm in the hands of the organisers as to how long we can continue. Federica's 10 minutes. Okay, let's see how we get on. Question at the back, please.
Thank you. This is Raffaella from Marchese from Italy. I have a question for Martin and Raisa. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this topic. Thanks to the Standing Committee, it's been really interesting. I think so far, I'm going to touch upon a topic that has been briefly mentioned during the discussion today, but we have mainly focused so far on the environmental pillar of sustainability. And of course, then you have the ethical and the social pillars, which are equally important, in my opinion. And to be more specific, there is one sustainable development goals, which is number 10, which is all about reducing inequality. And I think the event industry should probably start paying more attention to that when it comes to organizing only in English conferences. That's a big inequality. It's a big inequality both in terms of the selection of speakers, because you're only selecting those speakers who are fluent enough to, give their presentations in English, and you are forgetting about all the other competent speakers. They're very competent in their subject matter, but maybe they're not good enough in English to talk and present in English. And then you are also reducing the, you're causing big social inequality for the audience, because those who will interact during the conference are those who are brave enough to take the mic and speak a different language. So, organizing English-only events, it's a big, it's all against sustainability. And so the question is, well, I'm quite ignorant in the ISO standard you mentioned, which I think it's 20121. And I'd like to know whether there is anything about this topic, because probably, I don't know, I'll get some more details about this ISO, but if it only talks about using paper cups and reducing the carbon footprint of attendees, well, there is a big leg missing, which is that of this social inequality, which in Italy we call it linguistic isolation. And the reason I'm asking this question to both of you is that in Italy we are embarking on a big project with other representatives of the MICE industry. There is a big coalition which is called Italia Live, and this project, well, to make a long story short, the main objective of this project is to lobby so that in the future, those organizers who organize an event in Italy with Italian as the main language of the conferences might get some fiscal benefit. That's the ultimate goal. It's, you know, that's a huge, I don't know whether we will get there, but we are starting, we are trying our best to do that. And so, and for me, this is a subject I'm very keen on. So for me, it's normal to think about linguistic isolation as a big problem. But I'd like, well, if this was part of the ISO, that would be ideal. And if it's not part of the ISO standard, can we do anything in order to include it? That will make our project so much more feasible. So thank you.
Thank you, Raffaella. Let's go to Raisa first to ask that direct question then about 20121.
Thank you, Raffaella. So the ISO 20121 is a comprehensive sustainable events management system. So as a standard, it cannot and possibly will not ever take up all of the different types of sustainability that exist there. And I'm not an expert in that particular standard, but I love this idea of linguistic isolation and that concept of enabling accessibility and inclusion in that. So as themes, those have been built into the events sustainability management system standard. And I think here the critical element is in us as consultants and advisors to open up the landscape to our clients who may not have ever thought about this. So ensuring that when our clients think about sustainability, then these are also the concerns that they think about. Now, in terms of standards, ISO standards especially, are quite rigid in that they are a collaboration effect. And the 20121 was established and published in 2012. A lot has happened in the world since that standard was published, and especially in the events industry. They do get reviewed regularly every 5 years, usually. But I think especially here, there are so many new elements that have come under this idea of what does sustainability mean? What does inclusion and accessibility mean? That we've got a responsibility in our profession to take those up with our clients as well and help them understand what that actually means in terms of accessibility through interpreting.
Thank you, Raisa. So over to Martin then. How concerned are events organisers about linguistic inclusion and redressing inequalities?
There's no easy way to sort of answer this, because we have to admit a home truth, which is a bit of a lesser known and unpopular one, is that the events industry, as we call it, or the MICE industry, isn't a real industry, as in it's not something that is measured or accepted. And this is traced back to a very basic administrative setup, which is called ISIC, which is the UN's coding system that defines what an industry is. And we have various domestic versions of this. In the US and the EU, it's called NACE. In the UK, it's called SIC. And yeah, exactly. And it's it essentially means that when you start a business, you put down what you do. Really, there's nothing for the events industry. Of the 752 codes, there are 5 and they're spread out. One's lost in hotels, 2 are in admin services, blah, 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 blah. It's not the events industry that decides what events happen. We are the facilitators. It's up to the individual industries to decide what they do. Now, English is the international language of business. I believe that's that's still a constant. And the way we look at it is all these sectors are vertical: automotive, aviation, oil and gas, whatever you like. The event sector, or my sector, is a horizontal across them. We are the facilitators. Don't really have the say to decide which language is the language of choice for that particular event. What we can do, and the privileged position that the sector does have, is that it can take best practice learning and apply that to its other clients. The agency applied to run one event who have decided to say, right, we're taking a more inclusive approach. We're going to have this in the mother tongue of the nation we're in, and English is the second string language. Fine. That's knowledge gained by our industry, which they can take to the next client. So we're very much in a supporting role in that way. I'm not really sure if there's too much more I can say, really, but I think that should give you a flavour of the mindset at least.
It does. Thank you very much, Martin. Claire, you've waited very patiently.
Thank you. Claire Godfrey, based in Madrid. Thank you to all the panelists for a great discussion. We've heard about sustainability overall. We've talked about being sustainable as consultant interpreters, as being individual interpreters. But what about us as AIC then, as an organization? I think this is for Martin. Okay, so if AIC would like to position itself, promote itself as a sustainable interpretation provider, would the events organizers find that attractive? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, I think you have to be vocal. Don't be shy in articulating what you do. At the end of the day, event organizers are in a very testing situation. If they're not in-house, they are dealing with someone else's budget. They've been told to deliver the world, and they've got 20p to do it. And they have to make savings. You need to make sure that when they make savings, that's somewhere else. Okay, essentially that's what I think that's what we all want. But we're going in that direction. So, for example, I didn't mention this in the trends piece earlier on, but there's a bigger shift towards plant-based food now, for example. So serving plant-based food as standard with the meat as the option. So it's like the other way around, and that's fine. So if for as long as the events industry or event organizers are doing that in those almost less essential areas, it makes it better for this community here, because you are an essential service. You can't do what you do cheaply. It has to be done. You can't take a risk. And obviously from what I've heard today, that you all deal with some very high profile events and interpretation at a diplomatic level, at serious government level. That's got to be right. You can't do that on the cheap. So straight away, you are an essential service that has a value that cannot be cut. Of course, what organisers are going to want to have to demonstrate is how you can do that cleanly and greenly. So as long as you've got that rhetoric, and it doesn't have to be perfect because it's about reduction, then you'll be okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Alexandra just has a very, sorry, Livy. Alexandra, briefly.
Yes, we're in the business of communication, and as we said, communication is inclusion. And a lot of clients, until now, were only looking at the cost. Now they're going to look at the environmental part, but they're also going to look at, is this on-site event or is this meeting really necessary? What is the value to it? But for years, even before this happened, I was telling my clients, being based in Ireland, you are flying everybody in. And if half the audience cannot understand the Irish speakers at high speed, you've gained nothing except a good shindig up in Guinness storehouse, right? So the cost of your conference, which is exactly what you said, is basically wasted on a few English people and a few Irish people. The others, they came here, they didn't follow the medical conference or anything else. So with the added value, exactly as you say, the saving has to be made somewhere else.
Thank you. We're back to value consumption versus value creation. And we must just take one final question from Anna.
Thank you. Anna Hubli from Finland. And I've been now listening to you all. That's been fantastic. It's been brain tickling and I'm just sizzling all over. I just like to ask you one question. please give me your wildest vision on how this is going to be continuing to develop in terms of sustainability in future? Briefly, because we all want to go for lunch.
That's a great question to finish on, actually. Thank you, Anna. Martin, would you like to start?
I hadn't thought about that, on how I might pick on that, but sustainability should be ingrained in everything you do, but I hope that it is not to the detriment of value services. Don't cut on the value. And I would hope that event organisers going forward cut out the fluff to focus on the the high value services, such as what you do. That would be my summary.
Thank you, Martin. Raisa, would you have a comment on that?
Yes, I'd say hello, everyone from Finland, where I'm stuck, but modern technology has enabled me to join you anyway. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be with you in person. So yes, I would say I would like to see a future for all types of interpreting and not just conference interpreting, where we can genuinely use technology as an enabler to deliver the types of services and solutions to our clients that make sense to them and the events that they want to put together, and that the professionals delivering that service, interpreters, have got the tools and the means to continue practicing their profession at the very high level that is being practiced at the moment, so that technology aids us and doesn't hamper us, whichever way we use it.
Thank you very much. On to Anna.
And I have to thank you for that question, because we're actually planning on asking you this question in the afternoon. We would like to know how you would like AIC and PRIMS in particular to be more sustainable in the future, what you think is the next step. We've taken some measures in this event. We would like to know if you agree with them, if you want to continue doing this in the future. So it's actually a perfect transition for the session this afternoon. We're hoping that you would help us answer that question.
Fabulous. One final word then, Alexandra.
My wish for the future is awareness raising. Events like this means we talk and we are more aware. Oh, I didn't know that business class tickets cost more in CO2 emission than economy class tickets. And I didn't know that I don't have to do reply to all. And I didn't know. And so we do this with our colleagues, we do this with our clients. We get them to understand that interpreters are part of the sustainability of their event, the legacy, the message being spread, not just to the English-speaking world, but to everybody on the planet. So awareness raising is my word.
All that remains then is to thank our panellists. It's been a really rich discussion. Thank you for your questions as well, and see you this afternoon.
And thank you very much to our excellent moderator, Louise, and
Thank
to
you,
Raisa
Louise.
Online.
Okay. Yes, we'll resume the session at 2:15. The vertical bar offers several options for lunch. Otherwise, nearby you'll find plenty of places. Thank you very much to the interpreters. A big applause to them. Thank you.